Hello and welcome to the latest episode of MEP Engineered Online. I am editor Tom Oxtoby, and today I'm very pleased to be joined by Andy Merris, who is CFO at energy service company QTM. Andy, very warm welcome. How do we find you today? You in good spirits?
Very good, Tom. Thank you very much. All's good here.
Excellent, excellent. Retrofitting has been touted as an area of massive growth opportunity over the next 3, 5, 10 years. Do you agree with that statement?
Oh, completely. I mean, my time in the Middle East, I've been here now just over 12 years, and I've seen a lot of buildings go up. And experience from the UK, the PFI, PPP experiences, buildings really come up for an intervention 10 or 15 years through the asset lifecycle. And, from what we see now, there's a number of signature developments, whether it's Dubai Marina, whether it's JLT, or whether it's Yas Island. There's a lot of developments that have tripped over that 10-year hurdle and are entering into a life cycle intervention for retrofitting. We also see that, kind of the Middle East is a great place, but it's the environment, the swings in temperature really mean that, that 15-year, 20-year kind of asset life cycle tends to be brought forward. So, it's a great time for retrofitting. It's a great time to be moving things forward and changing equipment. I think in the next 3 to 5 years, Tom, it certainly is going to be an interesting place to be playing. Yeah.
Excellent, excellent. And are you able to sort of give us any idea of QTM's plans specifically for 2021, or any big projects you're going to be heading into, working on?
Well, it's, as an accountant, I look forward to the year end, and the year is far from finished. We're still in Q4. There's still some legs left in Q4. There's still some sprints. So we've got some interesting, exciting opportunities with our partners, with our investors coming through. But this year has been a phenomenal year for QTM. Apart from winning the awards, we've launched in Australia, we've launched in Eastern Europe. Australia in particular is a real interesting place for us. It really has the opportunity to be moving away from residential and hospitality into the leisure sector, but also, more importantly, into the agricultural sector. We're seeing a lot more energy being used in agriculture. We're seeing a lot more technology, robots being used, and therefore a lot more requirements on energy conservation, energy generation at the micro grid level. So, those are the highlights for 2021 for us. But there's still legs left in 2020.
Great stuff. And you mentioned there about robotics, automation, the move to digitalization, all these smart solutions. What's your sort of area of focus in terms of R&D, and how do you feel about that as a CFO? Because obviously you're in charge of the purse strings on that front.
Well, yes. A lot of R&D, as you're probably alluding to there, Thomas, as accountants tend to be kind of quite shy of it and tend to kind of look and see what is the return on this R&D. But thankfully, QTM has been around for over 8 years. And the R&D that we have, it's incremental R&D. It's not from a blank paper. So we have our own proprietary software called Brain that really looks at measuring, monitoring, and adapting buildings. So every 15 minutes, so by the end of this interview, there'll be a series of data points from all the buildings that we're managing that will be added to it. So we're in the next phase of implementing the Brain, the proprietary software that we have. That's being rolled out across new geographies. But also we're looking at other technologies. We're looking, particularly with the pandemic, we're looking at ways to minimize airflow. We're looking at ways of restricting that and actually addressing the air, whether it's UVC lighting or whether it's other technologies that our suppliers are coming through. So, we're looking at best in class from technology, from a supplier perspective, and looking to implement that with our own solutions, our own kind of software that really kind of stitches the technology together. So, we are still investing in R&D. We still have innovative products, and thankfully, these things are give us 5-7 year yields on our investments. So I think I'm one of the few accountants that's quite excited about technology and the R&D that we're putting into this space, given where the market is. Yeah.
That's great. That's great to hear. The construction industry, widely guilty of being slow to adopt new methods of thinking and working and building. But certainly this year, the debate has sort of been amplified by the pandemic. Do you think that gap between sort of like client expectations and what can be delivered for, you know, in terms of a reasonable cost is shrinking? Do you think there's a shift in attitudes on that front?
Yeah, I mean, it's accelerating for sure. It's accelerating, and it is, you know, it's getting people more together and aligned, rather than on an outside of a project, you have the consultants at one end of the extreme, who have very hypothetical, theoretical views on life. You have the contractors who are very pragmatic and delivering the projects. And then you have the operators at the far end. So stitching those three sort of pieces together across the development life cycle, and making projects get delivered much sooner earlier, you know, kind of brings forward these attitudes. I mean, there's still the goal. We're still 30 years out from the 2050 aspirations for net zero, and you know that's one of the things that a lot of people are moving towards. And net zero is a lot of it is about energy conservation. You know, over 60% of it is through the energy conservation rather than energy generation. So I see that all three arms of the consultant, the contractor, and the operator are really looking to kind of pull the projects through the life cycle to actually get that net zero, to actually kind of reduce costs going further forward and improve indoor air quality. So I can see that the market is beginning to work much closer together now.
And then you mentioned net zero there. Do you see standardization and legislation, you know, having a massive impact on the adoption of retrofit services? I mean, particularly now that people are talking about the importance of preventing the spread of disease, amplified by COVID, obviously. And, you know, do you see legislation driving adoption?
To an extent, yes. I mean, certainly legislation isn't going to hinder this space. It's going to be an enabler. And whether it's legislation from a government-wide perspective, or whether it's actually something which it's driven by the end user. So it's the end users, for example, in Australia, they have the neighbours system whereby you can look at the quality of the building's air. You can look at the green footprint that the building has, for example. But legislation is certainly going to be an enabler for this. For sure. I can see that, you know, kind of elsewhere in the world, you know, there's going to be tax breaks, you know, there's going to be carbon credit trading that's really going to enable building owners to look at their assets much more carefully. But again, that's a longer play piece, I would say, Tom. I think there's a lot to be getting on right now. So I think the legislation will come into play, but it's an enabler in 3 years' time or so.
Is QTM involved? You know, do you create position papers, white papers? Do you lobby government, for lack of a better word, obviously?
No, I mean we don't tend to do those sorts of things. But what we do find really interesting, what you mentioned about position papers, is the work that we've done recently on the Dubai hospitality market, on the hotels. So reviewing approximately 50 hotels with over 300 keys, and looking actually what the impact of occupancy is on the energy there. And you know, from what our findings show is that there's, of course, with COVID, there's been a massive step down in energy consumption, but arguably, normally you would see that if there's anything up from 60% occupancy, that occupancy is not necessarily a driving factor of energy consumption. It's more about the external weather conditions, and you can see the swings from humidity in the summer to causing greater energy consumption rather than the occupancy there. So yes, we're in the process of drafting that position paper, that update, reviewing the analysis that we have, and that will probably be released early in the new year, really as a thought piece to looking back over 2020 and looking forward to 2021. Yes.
Excellent. We look forward to going through that. Andy, it's been a pleasure speaking with you about this very important subject. But sadly, that is all we have time for today. I'd like to thank you once again for joining us.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you.
And of course, thank you, viewer, for tuning in, and we will see you on the next episode of MEP Engineered.